Carolyn Betts is an attorney who, over the past 8 years, has developed a specialty in the legal aspects of economic and spiritual warfare involving the U.S. government and major government contractors in the U.S. black budget. Her practice initially concentrated on securities and real estate law, and she became a partner in the corporate finance department of a Washington, D.C.-based law firm in 1993. When an age discrimination case brought by a family member against the Ohio PERS resulted in an adverse U.S. Supreme Court ruling, she lobbied and testified before both houses of Congress in connection with the ultimate adoption of the Older Workers Benefit Protection Act, which codified regulations struck down by the Supreme Court. In 1995, she became a senior banker at the Hamilton Securities Group, Incorporated, when that firm served as the lead financial advisor to the Department of Housing and Urban Development. That's the connection with Catherine Austin Fitts. She continued on as general counsel of Hamilton after its government contract was terminated, its officers were seized by the FBI, and the company became the target of a subpoena enforcement action and a secret sealed, quote, reverse whistleblower lawsuit, unquote, brought by a government-backed informant as an apparent attempt to cover up improper and illegal activities at the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Currently, she provides legal and consulting services to a startup investment advisory company founded by Catherine Austin Fitts, the CEO of Hamilton, and continues to be involved in Hamilton's ongoing litigation. Carolyn Betts, back to you.
Thank you. What I want to tell you, the bad news is that I am not a criminal attorney, and I can't recite chapter and verse what the laws are that relate to this.
But you can say, I do swear to tell the truth to this commission.
I swear to tell the whole truth to this commission.
Beautiful. Thank you.
My background is, as you heard, is as a corporate finance attorney. And I did very large transactions, many of them involving government as my client. And Carlyle was involved in some of the transactions, and some of the likes of J.P. Morgan Chase and Goldman Sachs and GE Capital and lots of companies like that. I also represented Resolution Trust Corporation in connection with the cleanup of the savings and loan crisis. So I came across lots of documents involving fraudulent transactions that had taken place during the 1980s. And so when I have become involved in the 9/11 truth, dealing with the 9/11 truth evidence, and the question, what do we do with this? The way I see it harks back to my experience in Washington as someone who worked for a government contractor, who represented the government, and has been involved in doing the paperwork and follow-up work involved in getting things done in the government, and also my experience lobbying for the passage of a bill. And so my reaction when I saw this information is, what we need is a taxonomy. And I went to for your benefit, I went to Merriam-Webster online and looked up the word taxonomy, and it says, orderly classification of plants and animals according to their presumed natural relationships. That's the phylum stuff that you learned in science. The application of the concept for this purpose is in creating a methodology of organization of information about 9/11 according to distinct categories, and within those categories, within one or more lists of criteria that have relevance from some systems or social group standpoint. What I'm saying is you need to put this in context. And within categories that are understandable and relevant to the people that you want to appeal to pay attention to you and to do something. So I created, and it'll be on the website, a number of what I call taxonomies. And it's basically a list of things to ask about this evidence. The first one was New York damages to residents and governments. And what I asked myself is, define all of these things. What is the direct property damage involved? The loss of property value to New Yorkers. The loss of life directly in the tragedy. Loss of future earnings. Mental distress. Loss of use of limbs and mental capacity. Loss of health and decreased life expectancy. Environmental damage. Pollution. Liability for increased health care expenses. Now, this is a governmental cost. Medicaid, New York City and state pension plans, Medicare, Social Security, disability, these are all things that have to be paid for at some point, and somebody cares about having to come up with the money to pay it. Think tobacco settlement. Direct monetary damages, the cost to repair, rescue, etc. That, again, is a New York City expense for the most part. Loss of profits and business to owners as a result of the tragedy. Loss of tax revenue to New York. Increased mandatory expenses for security and homeland defense. Loss of privacy and individual rights as the result of the USA Patriot Act, which was enacted as an excuse. It was an excuse to enact it. Loss of life of military people in Iraq and Afghanistan, if you want to take it out. These are the types of things we need to ask and quantify and be very clear on, because these are legal concepts that are measured, that are things that you have to prove in court, and this will always be what affects somebody who's looking at this from a governmental or judicial standpoint. The next taxonomy category I have is possible crimes and other bases for liability. On the site, I'm going to have certain selected about half of the statutory provisions in the penal law of the state of New York. I'm just going to read a few of them. Criminal solicitation, conspiracy, attempt, criminal facilitation, assault, homicide, kidnapping, burglary, criminal mischief, arson, larceny, offenses involving computers, accessorial conduct, that's aiding and abetting, forgery, offenses involving false written statements, insurance fraud, bribery, official misconduct, bribery involving public servants, perjury and related offenses, enterprise corruption, money laundering, terrorism. Those are all provisions in the New York statutes. And each one of those provisions also has a level of culpability that has to be proven in order to hold someone liable. So when you're looking at what people did in this whole morass of huge amounts of information, you got to find out for a particular crime, do you have to show that they intentionally did something, they knew what was going to happen, that they were grossly negligent, that their behavior was beyond the pale and they should have known, that they were merely negligent? Or was it something that they're liable for no matter whether they knew or not? That makes a difference. And when you're presenting evidence to someone in an official capacity who wants to know whether they've got something to prosecute, you've got to, it will be helpful to that person to know what you have gathered in those particular terms. So possible crimes, I made a more generic list: murder, manslaughter, assault, conspiracy, criminal facilitation, bank, insurance, securities, and other fraud, trespass and damage to property, both personal and real, obstruction of justice, lying under oath, breach of contract. Remember that there are a lot of government contractors here. That's a breach. Their breach of contract is how you're going to get to a government contractor, probably. Military crimes. There are also military people involved here. Acts or omissions based on duties that arise under government job description. Liability of a principal for an agent's conduct. Failure to supervise. Contract. I already did contract liability. Faulty building materials or methods, that sort of thing. Building code violations, immigration law violations, Clean Air Act, and other pollution violations. Those are just examples of what we're dealing with. Now, another thing to look at is the strength of the hard evidence. We've been hearing a lot of theories and a lot of facts, and we tend to mix them all up and build a story, which is really good for figuring out between you and me what we think happened. But in a court of law, and in order to justify investigatory action, you need to have proof at various levels, and just consider how strong the proof is of each particular thing that you're bringing to the table. So a taxonomy in this respect would perhaps rank the evidence according to which is your strongest case. You know, where could you show something? Now, this is my opinion, but I think filmed and recorded accounts are probably about as strong as you're going to get, and it all goes down from there. Physical evidence, like air tests results, Official records like flight plans, FAA flight plans, New York Stock Exchange trading records, NORAD records, FBI directives, things like that. Unofficial records, flight school records, for example. Legal realities in terms of what the statutory duty is for someone who's in a particular job. That's evidence. This person holds this job. The statute says the person who holds this job is responsible for X, Y, and Z. If you're going to go after Donald Rumsfeld, you need to know what the Secretary of Defense has a statutory obligation to do. Congressional and Keene Committee testimony is also next level down in my list. Private testimony, eyewitness account, formal. Eyewitness account, informal. Accounts from that are in books. The reason I put that as this low down on the list is because it's what's called tertiary evidence. It's one step removed from the original source. And press accounts and other secondary sources. Then another taxonomical list that I made was identity of potential complainants and damaged parties. Here I have residents and workers in the area of the World Trade Center, rescue workers, property owners. Now remember, property owners include the Port Authority, the Transit Authority, Battery Park City, New York City School System, New York City Fire Department and Police Department, and other government agencies and private parties. These people are all involved in coming up with the money that's involved here and losing money. And that's what turns people on in government. If you want somebody in government to do something for you, you got to show them how they will bring in money or how they'll lose money if they don't do it, because money is power. Insurance carriers and other indemnifying parties, airlines, stock and bond holders. Ask yourself if there are New York City bonds that were affected by this, and certainly there was insider trading. Taxpayers or whoever's paying for the victims' compensation fund. The victims who are still alive, the survivors of the victims who are not, and whistleblowers who had access to incriminating information, particularly those who've been harassed because they've suffered more damages than the rest of us. Then another thing to ask yourself is, where is the public sentiment and support? Because no one in government is going to do anything if they don't think that their backside is covered. That they will, if they take a risk on your behalf, that there will be people standing behind them, supporting them in doing that. So ask yourself which things the public thinks are the most egregious in this list. And I put a list of possible answers: putting military and rescue workers in harm's way, disregard of airline safety, disregard of safety procedures in evacuating buildings, failure to warn, failure to heed warnings, failure to investigate, benefiting from tragedy, using tragedy as an excuse to deny civil rights, allowing potential conspirators to leave the country. I imagine you know who I'm talking about there. Allowing illegally obtained or tainted funds to leave the country or become available to fund preparation, execution, and cover-up of the 9/11 tragedy. Using the tragedy to get government contracts. I also figure you know a few of those. Using tragedy to hide failings or legal infractions that have been committed. Using the tragedy to get appropriations. Using the tragedy for political purposes. Using the tragedy as an excuse for war. Misuse of taxpayer funds. Instilling of terror in the hearts of New Yorkers and Washingtonians. And here I just want to make a plug for Washingtonians. I was in Alexandria, Virginia, when whatever happened at the Pentagon happened. And we were afraid they were coming after our friends at the White House and the Capitol. And then my final category was identification of potentially culpable or liable parties. And we've heard some names here, and I made my own list, but I'm sure you have a longer one. And this is in no particular order, but it's just as an example of something you might come up with. Bush Cheney, Rumsfeld, Wolfowitz, Rice and the National Security Council, CIA, George Tenet, FBI, Louis Freeh, NORAD, FAA, Myers, Winfield, and I also want to put in a plug for what happened in Washington, the anthrax poisoning, the people in charge of Fort Detrick. So, these are just these are examples of ways to look at what you have in front of you to determine what you're going to do with it and what your strategy is going to be. Because if you don't have a strategy and you don't have a clear goal, you will have a wonderful time exchanging anecdotes about who thinks what really happened. But will you get anything done about it? I also wanted to just mention about what are the possible forums. Where could you go? Consider that you're going to need to decide on a choice of forum. There are different levels of government. We've got federal, state, local, and the ones involved here in New York is the obvious one, and of course I'm in New York. So it's the state of jurisdiction where both the majority of the location of the majority of the damages, the residence of the many of the victims, the connection with many of the potential law violations. It's also the situs of the New York Stock Exchange. This is where many of the money center banks are located, their main offices, and they presumably were involved in transfer of money that we might be interested in. And there also are usually foreign branches or local branches in New York City of foreign banks that might have been involved in spiriting money that could have been used to pay for the 9/11 activities. So New York is the obvious, and in New York you have the Attorney General's office. Eliot Spitzer is the Attorney General of New York, as I'm sure you know. And you also have Robert Morgenthau, who is the district attorney for the borough of Manhattan, and he's the one who went after BCCI. So don't forget, local people sometimes have the wherewithal, but understand that when there's an investigation that's going to be as expensive as this, somebody has to pay for it. And somebody can either have funds or be denied or have an influence in denying funds. So you have to look at who the supporters are for whatever it is you want to do. And we can also look at possible legislative action, but I tell you that it takes a long time, and the horse is probably out of the barn door. So court action, I've been involved in a court case that has gone on since 1996, and we're now going into our first set of appeals. So that's sort of what you can expect. My prepared statement has, and the exhibits have a lot more detail if you want to go on the site and look at it for some more specific content. But I hope this has inspired you to think a little bit more deeply about putting everything into context and thinking like a lawyer in deciding what you want to put forward in order to put your best foot forward. And thank you very much.